The sun hung low and merciless over the endless grassland, painting everything in shades of gold and rust. Sarah's bare feet bled against the rough earth, leaving crimson drops on yellowed stalks of prairie grass. Her dress, once the color of fresh cream, now hung in tatters around her bruised legs. She had been running since before dawn, when the household still slept and her father's snores shook the thin walls of their cabin. Behind her lay the town of Redemption Creek, a name that mocked everything it stood for. There was no redemption in those dusty streets, no salvation in the church where the preacher spoke of obedience while his eyes wandered where they shouldn't. Her father had promised her to the blacksmith, a man whose fists were as hard as the iron he shaped, whose breath reeked of whiskey and whose temper flared quicker than forge fire. The wedding was to be tomorrow, or today. She had lost track of time in her desperate flight. Sarah pressed on. Though her legs trembled and her throat burned with thirst, the Nebraska territory stretched before her, vast and unforgiving. Hawks circled overhead, their shadows dancing across the waving grass. She knew the dangers: wolves, rattlesnakes, the scorching sun that could kill as surely as any bullet, but these seemed gentle fates compared to what awaited her back in town. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and something else, horse sweat and leather. Sarah's heart seized. They had found her already. She stumbled, falling to her knees among the rough grass, and frantically looked back, but the horizon remained empty, just a shimmering line where earth met sky. Then she heard it, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, coming not from behind but from the north. A lone rider crested the hill, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Sarah's breath caught. The rider sat tall and straight, moving as one with his horse in a way that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. As he drew closer, she saw the long black hair flowing free, the decorated leather shirt, the proud set of his shoulders. A Lakota warrior. Sarah had heard stories in town, terrible tales of raids and scalping, of white women carried off never to be seen again. The townsfolk spoke of Indians as they would speak of demons, creatures without souls or mercy. But as the rider approached, something in his bearing made her stay still rather than run. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps some instinct deeper than fear. The warrior's horse was a paint mare, brown and white patches gleaming with good health. He reined in some 20 feet away, studying her with eyes as dark and unreadable as deep water. Sarah waited for him to reach for the rifle slung across his back, or the knife at his belt. Instead, he raised one hand slowly, palm outward, the universal sign of peaceful intent. "You are hurt," he said in English, his voice deep and carefully measured. The words carried only a trace of accent. Sarah tried to speak, but only a croak emerged from her parched throat. She swayed where she knelt, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. The warrior dismounted in one fluid motion. He was taller than she had expected, lean but powerful, moving with the controlled grace of a mountain cat. From his saddlebag, he produced a water skin. He approached slowly, as one might approach a wounded deer, and held it out to her. Sarah's hands shook as she took it. The water was warm but clean, and she drank greedily until he gently pulled it back. "Slow," he cautioned. "Too much will make sick." Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 winters, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. A thin scar ran from his left eyebrow to his hairline. His eyes, she noticed, held none of the cruel hunger she had grown accustomed to seeing in men's faces. There was wariness there, certainly, and something else, a kind of grave assessment, as if he were reading the story written in her torn dress and bloodied feet. "Please," Sarah finally managed to whisper. "I can't go back. I can't." He studied her for a long moment. Then he looked back the way she had come, his expression hardening slightly. "Men follow?" She nodded, fresh tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "My father, others, they'll make me—" She couldn't finish. The warrior, for she could think of him no other way, stood and scanned the horizon with practiced eyes. Whatever he saw, or didn't see, seemed to decide something for him. He moved back to his horse and pulled a blanket from his pack, along with strips of soft leather. "Feet first," he said, kneeling again. He gestured for her to sit, and when she hesitantly complied, he began cleaning her wounds with water from the skin. His hands were gentle but efficient, the hands of someone who had tended many injuries. Sarah flinched at first, unused to any touch that didn't bring pain, but gradually relaxed as he worked. "My name is Joseph Running Elk," he said as he wrapped her feet in the leather strips. "My mother was white, taken in a raid when she was young. She chose to stay with my father's people. Taught me her tongue." He looked up at her briefly. "What do they call you?" "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Whitman." "Sarah." He said it carefully, as if tasting the sound. "Where you run to?" "Sarah Whitman." The question she had been avoiding since she'd slipped out of her father's house. Where could a woman alone go in this vast wilderness? She had no money, no family beyond the ones she fled from, no skills beyond keeping house and avoiding her father's fists. "I don't know," she admitted. "Away, just away." Joseph Running Elk finished with her feet and sat back on his heels. The afternoon sun was sinking lower, painting his bronze skin with warm light. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind, some decision that went beyond the simple choice of helping or leaving her. "Dark comes soon," he said finally. "The coyotes hunt at night, men too." He stood and extended his hand to her. "You come. I know a place." Sarah stared at his outstretched hand. Everything she had been taught screamed warnings: savage, heathen, dangerous. But those same voices had told her to be obedient, to marry where she was told, to accept her lot with Christian resignation. Those voices had led her to this moment. Barefoot and bleeding in the wilderness, she took his hand. He lifted her easily to her feet, steadying her when she swayed, with careful movements. He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, then lifted her onto his horse as if she weighed nothing. She tensed, expecting him to swing up behind her, to press close as the men in town would have done. Instead, he took the mare's reins and began walking, leading them north toward a line of cottonwoods that marked a distant stream. They traveled in silence as the sun touched the horizon, setting the grassland ablaze with color. Sarah clutched the blanket around her, marveling at how different this felt from every other time she'd been near a man. Joseph Running Elk walked with steady purpose, occasionally glancing back to check on her, but never with that look she knew so well, the look that made her feel like prey. As purple twilight gathered, they reached the cottonwoods. A small stream gurgled between the trees, and in a sheltered bend stood a simple shelter made of bent saplings and hide. Joseph Running Elk helped her down from the horse, his touch brief and impersonal. "Rest," he said, gesturing to the shelter. "I make fire." Sarah limped to the shelter and collapsed gratefully on the buffalo robe spread inside. Through the opening, she watched him tend to his horse first, removing the saddle and brushing her coat with practiced strokes. Only after the animal was cared for did he begin gathering wood for a fire. The ordinary domesticity of it all, a man doing simple tasks as darkness fell, made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. When was the last time she had felt safe as night approached? When had darkness meant anything but dread? Soon a small fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the cottonwood trunks. Joseph Running Elk disappeared into the darkness and returned with more water, fresh this time from the stream. He set a small pot over the fire and added strips of dried meat and some roots from his pack. "Eat, then sleep," he said, settling cross-legged on the other side of the fire. "Tomorrow we go to my people's camp. The women will give you clothes, proper ones for traveling." "Your people?" Fear crept back into Sarah's voice. "But I'm white. Won't they—" "My mother was white," he reminded her. "Now she is Lakota. It is not blood that makes family." Sarah pulled the blanket tighter. "I can't be anyone's family. I won't be owned again." For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched his stern features. Lakota women are not owned. They choose their path, their husband. They can divorce by putting a man's belongings outside the teepee. He stirred the pot with a wooden spoon. "You would learn our ways, heal, then choose what you wish. And if men come looking," his expression hardened again, "then they learn that Lakota protect those under their care." The simple declaration, spoken without boast or threat, just quiet certainty, made Sarah's eyes burn with unshed tears. Protection without possession, strength without cruelty. She had thought such things existed only in fairy tales her mother used to tell, before the fever took her. They ate in companionable silence, the simple stew warming Sarah from the inside. Her eyelids grew heavy, but she fought sleep, old habits of vigilance hard to break. "Sleep," Joseph Running Elk said gently. "I keep watch. All night?" "All night." And so Sarah Whitman, who had not slept soundly in years, curled up on buffalo robes in a shelter of bent trees and hide, while a Lakota warrior sat silent by the fire. The vast prairie night sang around them, coyotes calling, owls hunting, wind whispering secrets through the grass. But for the first time in memory, these sounds brought no fear. She slept, and did not dream of tomorrow's wedding or her father's rage or the blacksmith's hard hands. She dreamed instead of running, but this time not away from something, towards something still nameless but shining with possibility, waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Sarah woke to the sound of morning birds and the soft crackle of dying embers. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Then memory returned. The flight, the warrior, the promise of safety. Through the shelter's opening, she could see Joseph Running Elk still sitting by the fire, his silhouette unchanged from when she'd fallen asleep. Had he truly kept watch all night? He turned at the sound of her stirring, and in the pale dawn light, she could see the weariness in his eyes, though his posture remained alert. "The stream is there," he said, pointing through the cottonwoods. "Clean yourself. I will not look." Sarah emerged from the shelter, testing her wrapped feet. They hurt, but the leather strips cushioned the worst of it. She limped to the stream, finding a secluded spot behind a fallen log. The water was cold enough to steal her breath, but she scrubbed away the dirt and dried blood as best she could, trying not to think about how vulnerable she was, alone and unclothed in the wilderness. When she returned, Joseph Running Elk had laid out items on a blanket: a leather dress, soft and worn from use, moccasins, and strips of cloth for her hair. "My sister's," he explained. "She has many, will not mind." Sarah fingered the dress, marveling at the careful beadwork along the hem. It was finer than anything she'd owned. Despite being Indian clothing, she retreated to the shelter to change, emerging transformed. The dress fell to her calves, modest but allowing freedom of movement she'd never experienced in her constraining cotton garments. "Better," Joseph Running Elk said, and she thought she caught approval in his tone. He had already packed the shelter with practiced efficiency, loading everything onto his patient mare. "Can you ride?" "A little," Sarah admitted. Her father had owned a plow horse, though she'd rarely been allowed to ride. "Good. Today we share the horse. My camp is one day's ride, maybe more with rest stops." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. Sarah tensed, waiting for hands to wander, for his body to press inappropriately close. Instead, he maintained a careful distance, only touching her waist lightly to steady her when the horse moved. They rode north as the sun climbed, following no trail Sarah could see, though Joseph Running Elk never hesitated in his direction. The grassland gave way to low hills dotted with juniper and pine. He stopped frequently, checking their back trail, letting her drink and rest. During one such stop, as they sat in the shade of a large boulder, Sarah finally asked, "Why are you helping me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his eyes on the horizon. "My mother ran too, when she was young like you. A trapper found her, brought her to fort. The soldiers—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "They did not help. Sent her back to the man who hurt her. She ran again. In winter, my father's hunting party found her near frozen. She chose to stay with us, learn our ways, found kindness she never knew with her own people. Is she still alive? No, died 5 winters past, but she lived free, lived choosing her own path. He looked at Sarah directly. All people deserve this, to choose. They continued on, the landscape gradually changing, becoming more broken with ravines and hidden valleys. Joseph Running Elk began teaching her as they rode, his deep voice patient. See there? Tracks of antelope. Fresh, maybe 1 hour. And there, he pointed to scratches on a pine trunk. Bear marking territory. Old, though safe. Sarah listened intently, understanding these were survival skills, freely given. When they stopped to rest the horse, he showed her edible plants, wild turnips, choke cherries, prairie onions. His hands moved surely as he demonstrated how to dig roots without destroying the plant for next season. Everything has spirit, he explained. Take only what you need. Give thanks. This way, the earth provides always. It was so different from her father's attitude. Take everything, give nothing, own what you could grab. Sarah found herself hungry for this knowledge, this different way of seeing the world. As afternoon shadows grew long, they entered a narrow valley between 2 hills. Joseph Running Elk suddenly held up his hand, pulling the horse to a stop. His whole body had gone alert, like a wolf scenting danger. What is it? Sarah whispered. Smoke, not cook fire, wrong smell. He dismounted silently, helping her down. Wait here, stay with horse. But Sarah had learned too well what happened to women who waited helplessly. I'm coming with you. He studied her face, then nodded once. Together they crept up the hillside, using juniper bushes for cover. Near the crest, Joseph Running Elk dropped to his belly, motioning her to do the same. They peered over. Below, in a small meadow, stood the burned remains of a wagon. Smoke still rose from the wreckage. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. 2 bodies lay beside it, settlers, a man and woman, arrows protruding from their backs. Crow, Joseph Running Elk muttered, reading signs Sarah couldn't see. War party, maybe 6, 7 warriors. 2 hours passed, no more. Are they still near? No, took horses, goods, gone east. His expression was grim. This is why I bring you to my people quick. Crow and Lakota are enemies. They would not be gentle with white woman traveling with Lakota warrior. They retreated carefully back to the horse. Joseph Running Elk changed their route, leading them higher into the hills through paths that seemed impossible until they were on them. Sarah understood now the true danger of her situation, not just from her father and the men of Redemption Creek, but from the complex web of tribal conflicts she barely comprehended. As dusk approached, they reached another sheltered spot, this time a cave shallow enough to see out but deep enough to hide a small fire. Joseph Running Elk worked quickly to settle them for the night, his movements economical and watchful. We cannot reach my people today, he said. Too dangerous and dark. Rest here, leave at first light. Sarah helped gather wood, proud when he nodded approval at her selection of dry branches that would burn with little smoke. As they sat by the small fire, sharing dried meat and pemmican from his supplies, she felt the weight of unasked questions. Your sister's dress, she finally said. Won't she mind you giving it to a stranger? A white woman. Morning Star will be glad. He replied. She says I think too much of old hurts. Need to see good in world again. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She will say helping you proves her right. Old hurts. His hand moved unconsciously to his side, where Sarah now noticed another scar beneath his shirt. I had a wife once, Winter Dove, killed in cavalry attack 4 summers past. We had no warning. Soldiers came at dawn, shot into typhus. Women, children, did not matter to them. Sarah's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Your sorrow cannot change past, but you remind me, not all whites are soldiers. Some are just people, hurting, needing help. He added another stick to the fire. My mother taught this, but I forgot in my grief. They sat in companionable silence as darkness deepened outside their shelter. Sarah noticed how he positioned himself between her and the cave entrance, casual but protective. When had she last felt truly guarded rather than guarded against? "Tomorrow," he said eventually. "We reach my people before sun is high. You will be safe there." "And you?" Sarah asked. "What will your people say about bringing a white woman to camp?" "Some will speak against it, but my uncle is chief. He will remember how my mother came to us, how she became beloved sister and daughter. He will speak for you." He met her eyes across the fire. "Do not fear. I will not leave you alone among strangers." The simple promise, made without flourish or demand for gratitude, nearly undid Sarah's composure. In her world, protection always came with a price: obedience, submission, ownership. But this quiet warrior asked nothing except that she survive, that she choose her own path. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Live free," he replied. "That is thanks enough." As the fire burned low, Joseph Running Elk began to sing softly in his own language, a low, melodious chant that seemed to weave through the night air like smoke. Sarah didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. A prayer, perhaps, or a warding against evil. She fell asleep to that ancient music, feeling for the second night in a row the impossible luxury of safety. Outside, the vast prairie darkness held its dangers: bears and wolves, crow war parties, her father's pursuit that would surely come. But inside this small circle of firelight, with this unlikely protector keeping watch, Sarah Whitman began to believe she might actually survive to see what choices tomorrow would bring. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Joseph Running Elk adding wood to the fire, ensuring the light would last until dawn, a warrior's vigil, freely given, asking nothing in return. For the first time in her life, Sarah began to understand what honor looked like. The next days blurred together in a rhythm of survival and learning. True to his word, Joseph Running Elk had brought Sarah to his people's camp, where she was received with curiosity but not hostility. His uncle, Chief Stonehand, had listened gravely to her story and granted her sanctuary. Now, as autumn dressed the hills in gold and rust, Sarah found herself adapting to a life she could never have imagined. "No, not like that," Morning Star said, laughing as Sarah struggled with scraping a deer hide. "Too much pressure and you tear. Too little and fur remains. Here, feel." Joseph's sister guided Sarah's hands, showing her the proper angle and motion. Morning Star had indeed been delighted to have another woman near her age in camp, especially one who provided such amusing entertainment with her clumsy attempts at basic tasks. "I'm hopeless," Sarah sighed, sitting back on her heels. "You learn," Morning Star assured her. "When I was small, I ruined many hides. Mother made me practice on old ones until my hands knew the way." Across the camp, Sarah could see Joseph Running Elk working with the younger boys, teaching them to string bows. He moved among them with patient authority, adjusting grips, demonstrating draws. Sometimes he would glance her way, and she would quickly return to her work, face warming. The days had developed a pattern: mornings with the women, learning the endless tasks that kept the camp running: hide work, beating, food preparation, gathering. Afternoons, Joseph would find her for different lessons, the kind meant to keep someone alive in the wilderness. "Today we track," he announced one afternoon, appearing at the teepee where she worked. "Come." Sarah set aside her beating, another skill she was slowly mastering, and followed him. They walked far from camp, into a grove of aspens whose leaves whispered secrets in the breeze. "What do you see?" he asked, pointing to the ground. Sarah studied the earth carefully, remembering his previous teachings. "Deer tracks, but different sizes." "Good. What else?" She knelt, examining more closely. "The smaller ones are on top, so—" "A fawn following its mother." His approving nod made her ridiculously proud. "Yes, how long ago?" This was harder. She touched the edge of a track, feeling the moisture in the pressed earth. "Recent? The edges are still sharp. Maybe 2 hours. Good eyes." He moved forward, showing her broken twigs. disturbed leaves, all the small signs of passage she was learning to read. Why important to know this? To find game? Yes, but also to know who moves through your land. Animal, human, friend, enemy, all leave signs. They spent the afternoon tracking the deer, never intending to hunt, just following the story written in the earth. Joseph Running Elk was a different teacher than any Sarah had known. He never raised his voice, never showed impatience when she missed obvious signs. When she succeeded, his quiet approval meant more than any effusive praise. As they turned back toward camp, they came upon a creek swollen with recent rain. The crossing they'd used before was now a rushing torrent. "We go upstream," Joseph decided, but after walking a considerable distance, no better crossing appeared. "I can wade across," Sarah offered, though the water looked cold and swift. He studied the current, then her. "No, too dangerous. I carry you." Before she could protest, he had lifted her easily, one arm under her knees, the other around her back. Sarah went rigid, memories flooding back. Other men, other hands, never meaning safety. "Breathe," Joseph said quietly, not moving. "I will not hurt you." Sarah forced herself to relax, to trust. He stepped into the stream, water swirling around his legs, soaking his leggings. Halfway across, his foot slipped on a submerged rock. He compensated instantly, pulling her closer to maintain balance. And for a moment, she was pressed against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. His arms around her were protective, not possessive. When they reached the other side and he set her down gently, Sarah found herself reluctant to step away. "Thank you," she managed, voice slightly breathless. Something flickered in his dark eyes, quickly hidden. "Come, camp is near." That evening, as Sarah helped serve the communal meal, she overheard two warriors talking. "Running Elk spends much time with the white woman," one said in Lakota, not knowing she had learned enough to understand basic conversations. "He remembers his mother," the other replied, "and perhaps it is time he looked beyond his grief for Winter Dove." Sarah kept her face carefully neutral, but her hands trembled slightly as she ladled stew. Later, sitting with Morning Star by their teepee, she couldn't help asking, "Your brother, he truly loved his wife?" Morning Star's expression softened. "Like the sun loves the sky. When she died, I thought he might follow her to the spirit world. For 2 seasons, he was like a ghost himself. Only duty kept him here. And now," Joseph's sister gave her a knowing look, "now he teaches a white woman to track deer and carries her across streams. The women talk, you know. They say he smiles again, sometimes." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He's only being kind. He promised to keep me safe." "My brother does not make promises lightly," Morning Star said, "but safety and kindness, these are not why a warrior begins to sing again when he thinks no one listens." That night, unable to sleep, Sarah walked to the edge of camp where she could see the stars. The vast prairie sky still awed her, so different from the closed-in feeling of her father's house. She wasn't surprised when she heard quiet footsteps behind her. "Cannot sleep?" Joseph asked, coming to stand beside her. "Too many thoughts." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Finally, he spoke. "You are different now, stronger." "I'm learning," Sarah said, "though I'll never be truly Lakota." "Being Lakota is here." He touched his chest. "Not in blood alone. You work hard. Respect our ways. The people see this. And you." The question slipped out before she could stop it. "What do you see?" He was quiet for so long she feared she'd overstepped. Then, "I see a woman who chose fear over surrender, who grows stronger each day, who makes my sister laugh and helps the elders without being asked." He paused. "I see someone I am glad I found that day on the prairie." Sarah's heart beat fast in her chest. In her old life, such words from a man would have been a prelude to demands, to taking what they wanted. But Joseph Running Elk simply stood there, respecting the space between them, letting his words be enough. "I dream sometimes," she admitted quietly. That my father finds me, that he drags me back. Then he would face me, Joseph said simply. And all my people. You are under our protection now. I don't want to bring trouble to your camp. He turned to look at her then, his face serious in the starlight. Trouble comes whether we wish it or not, but a life without honor, without protecting those who need protection, this is not life at all. A cold wind swept across the prairie, and Sarah shivered. Without hesitation, Joseph removed his blanket and draped it around her shoulders, his hands lingering just a moment on her arms. Come, the night grows cold. As they walked back to camp together, Sarah wrapped in his blanket. She felt something fundamental shifting inside her. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was slowly being replaced by something else. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The understanding that strength could be gentle, that protection could be freely given, that a man's honor could be a shelter rather than a cage. She thought of the woman she'd been just weeks ago, bleeding and terrified on the prairie, ready to accept death over captivity. That woman could never have imagined this, walking safely through the darkness with a warrior who had shown her more respect in a few weeks than she'd known in a lifetime. Joseph, she said softly as they reached the camp's edge. He paused, looking at her with those deep, patient eyes. Thank you for everything. He inclined his head slightly. You give thanks too much. I do only what is right. But as Sarah made her way to Morningstar's teepee, still wrapped in his blanket that smelled of sage and wood smoke, she knew it was more than that. In choosing to help her, to teach her, to stand between her and harm without asking anything in return, Joseph Running Elk had shown her something she'd never believed existed, that there were still good men in the world, men who understood that true strength lay not in taking, but in protecting. Sleep came easier that night, wrapped in his blanket, knowing he was somewhere in the camp, keeping watch as he always did. The stars wheeled overhead. The prairie wind sang its ancient songs, and Sarah Whitman continued her journey from fear to trust, one careful step at a time. The morning started like any other, with frost crisping the grass and the camp stirring to life. Sarah was helping Morningstar prepare the morning meal when the dogs began barking, not their usual greeting bark, but the aggressive sound reserved for strangers. Joseph Running Elk appeared at her side so quickly she hadn't seen him approach. His hand rested on his knife hilt, body coiled with readiness. Stay close to the teepee, he ordered, then moved toward the camp's edge where other warriors were gathering. But Sarah recognized the voice that rang out across the morning air, and her blood turned to ice. I know she's here, my daughter Sarah Whitman. I've come to take her home. Her father, somehow, he'd found her. Through the gathering crowd, she could see them, 5 men on horseback. Her father, Samuel Whitman, sat in the lead, his face red with drink and fury despite the early hour. Beside him rode Thomas Brennan, the blacksmith she was meant to marry, his massive frame making his horse look small. 3 other men from Redemption Creek completed the group, all armed, all wearing the righteous expressions of men who believed their cause just. Chief Stone Hand emerged from his teepee, dignified despite the early hour intrusion. Joseph Running Elk stood at his right hand, translating as the chief spoke. Why do white men come armed to our peaceful camp? Sarah's father spat tobacco juice, deliberately close to where the chief stood. We come for stolen property. That woman there, he pointed directly at Sarah, who had emerged despite Joseph's warning, is my daughter. She was taken by your savage. I was not taken. Sarah stepped forward, her voice stronger than she felt. I chose to leave. Thomas Brennan's laugh was ugly. Women don't choose, girl. You belong to your father until you belong to me. That's the law. White man's law. Joseph Running Elk said coldly. It has no power here. Sarah's father's hand moved toward his pistol. Boy, you'll hand her over, or we'll... He never finished the threat. Joseph had drawn his knife in one fluid motion, the blade glinting in the morning sun. Around them, Lakota warriors knocked arrows to bowstrings with practiced ease. "You are 5, we are many," Joseph stated simply. "And you threaten those under our protection." "Protection?" Thomas Brennan sneered. "She's a white woman living with savages. Good Christians have a duty to save her from defilement." Sarah found her voice, anger overcoming fear. "The only defilement I've known was in your Christian town. These people have shown me more kindness and respect than I ever knew among my own kind." Her father's face purpled. "You ungrateful witch! After everything I did for you, you beat me!" The words exploded from Sarah. "You sold me to him," she pointed at Thomas. "Like I was cattle. I've seen the bruises he leaves on his horses. I know what he would have done to me." "Discipline," her father growled. "It's what you need. What you've always needed." Chief Stonehand raised his hand, and silence fell. When he spoke, Joseph translated, his voice carrying the chief's authority. "The woman came to us seeking sanctuary. She has worked alongside our people, learned our ways, shown respect. She stays by her choice, not by force. This is the Lakota way. All people choose their own path. I don't give a damn about your ways," Samuel Whitman snarled. "She's coming with us. Now!" He dismounted, striding towards Sarah. Joseph moved to intercept, but Sarah surprised everyone by stepping forward herself. "No," she said quietly. Her father stopped, blinking in surprise. She had never defied him so directly. "No," she repeated, louder. "I will not go. You have no power over me here. I'm your father." "A father protects, a father cherishes. You did neither." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. "I choose to stay with people who understand honor." Samuel Whitman's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, hand raised to strike, but Joseph Running Elk was faster. He caught the older man's wrist, holding it immobile with seemingly effortless strength. "You will not touch her," Joseph said, each word precise as a blade. "Not here, not ever again." For a moment, the two men stood frozen, a tableau of old world meeting new. Then Thomas Brennan made a fatal error, seeing his promised bride defended by an Indian. His own rage boiled over. He drew his pistol. The twang of bowstrings filled the air. Thomas's hat flew off, an arrow having passed close enough to part his hair. His horse reared, nearly unseating him. More arrows thudded into the ground at the horse's feet, making them dance nervously. "The next ones do not miss," Chief Stonehand said calmly. Joseph translating, "Leave, now, do not return." Sarah's father wrenched free of Joseph's grip, backing toward his horse. "This isn't over. I'll be back with the cavalry. They'll burn this whole camp to get her back. Then they will find nothing." Joseph replied, "We move like the wind. White man, your soldiers are slow and loud. We hear them coming for miles." "You're making war on the United States," one of the other men shouted. Morning Star stepped forward then, her English careful but clear. "We make war on no one. We protect a woman who asked for help. If this is crime in your world, then your world is broken." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah could see her father calculating odds, but even his whiskey-soaked brain could count. 5 men against 30 warriors, all with arrows aimed. "Get on your horse, Samuel," Thomas Brennan growled, holstering his pistol with obvious reluctance. "We'll handle this proper, through the law." As the men mounted, Sarah's father locked eyes with her one last time. "You're dead to me, girl. You hear? Dead. You've chosen these heathens over your own blood." "I've chosen freedom over slavery." Sarah replied, "I've chosen respect over fear. If that makes me dead to you, then I've been dead a long time already." The 5 men wheeled their horses and galloped away, dust rising in their wake. The warriors kept their bows drawn until the riders disappeared over the horizon. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah found herself shaking, delayed reaction setting in. Joseph's hand touched her elbow gently. "You were brave," he said. "I was terrified. Courage is not absence of fear. It is acting despite fear." He studied her face. "Your father, he will try again." "I know. Sarah looked around the camp that had become her haven. "I've brought danger to your people. Perhaps I should go." "No." The word was sharp, immediate. Joseph caught himself, speaking more softly. "No, running is finished. You stand and fight now. We stand with you." Chief Stonehand approached, placing a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. He spoke at length in Lakota, Joseph translating. "My uncle says you spoke with the heart of a warrior today. You claimed your freedom before all to see, among our people. This is sacred. He names you Wiakawin, Feather Woman, for you have learned to fly free like the eagle." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. A name, her own name, chosen not given, earned not imposed. But eagles must still watch for hunters. The chief continued through Joseph. "Your father spoke of soldiers. We must prepare." The rest of the day was spent in preparation. The camp that had seemed so permanent to Sarah revealed its nomadic nature as teepees began coming down. Goods being packed. By evening, they would be ready to move at a moment's notice. Joseph found her as she helped Morningstar pack their household goods. "You did well today," he said, "but this is just the beginning. They will come again, with more men, more guns." "I know," Sarah replied, carefully wrapping Morningstar's beading materials. "I'm sorry for bringing this trouble." "Stop!" His voice was firm. "You bring no trouble. They bring trouble. You bring—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "You bring life back to places that were dead." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, a young warrior ran up, speaking rapidly in Lakota. Joseph's expression darkened. "Scouts report soldiers 1 day's ride south, maybe 20 men." Sarah's heart sank. So soon, her father must have gone straight to the fort, spinning tales of kidnapped white women to inflame the cavalry's sense of duty. "What will we do?" Joseph smiled then, a warrior's smile that transformed his usually serious face. "What Lakota always do. We disappear like smoke, let them chase ghosts across the prairie." That night, as the camp prepared for movement, Sarah worked beside the women with new understanding. She wasn't just learning skills anymore. She was part of something larger, a people who valued freedom above all else. Her father thought to cage her again, but he didn't understand. She had tasted independence, felt the respect of being treated as a person rather than property. The stars were bright overhead as Joseph came to walk with her one last time before the move. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Sarah considered. "Yes, but it's different now. Before, I feared the cage. Now I fear losing my freedom. It's a better fear. I think one worth facing." He nodded approval. "Tomorrow we go north, into the sacred hills. Soldiers do not follow there. Too easy to ambush. Too hard to track. You will be safe." "We will be safe," Sarah corrected. "I'm not separate anymore. Your people's danger is mine." In the darkness, she felt rather than saw his smile. "Wiakawin, yes. You understand now." As they stood together under the vast prairie sky, Sarah knew the coming days would test her newfound courage, but she also knew she would not face them alone. Behind her stood a people who understood that freedom was worth any price, and beside her stood a warrior who had shown her that strength and gentleness could live in the same heart. Let them come, she thought. Let them all come. They would not find the frightened girl who had fled Redemption Creek. They would find Feather Woman, who had learned to fly. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows across the hidden valley where they'd made camp after 3 days of hard travel. Most of the band slept, exhausted from evading the soldiers who pursued them like stubborn hounds. But Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat wrapped in a buffalo robe, watching the flames die to embers. Joseph Running Elk materialized from the darkness, moving with his characteristic silence. He added wood to the fire, then settled across from her. "Your thoughts are heavy," he observed. Sarah pulled the robe tighter. "I keep thinking about that life, the one I left behind. Sometimes it feels like a nightmare I've awakened from. Other times—" She struggled for words. "Other times, you wonder if this is the dream." She nodded, surprised by his understanding. "Everything has changed so fast. A month ago. I was preparing for a wedding I dreaded. Now I'm learning to tan hides and speak Lakota while running from the cavalry. Change comes like the storm. Joseph said, swift, powerful, washing away what was before. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the night sounds, an owl calling, wind through pine boughs, the distant yip of coyotes. Finally, Sarah gathered courage to voice what had been weighing on her heart. In my world, my old world, men and women, there were rules, expectations. She stared into the fire, unable to meet his eyes. I was taught that a woman's body was currency, to be guarded until it could be traded in marriage. Then it belonged to her husband, to use as he wished. Joseph's expression darkened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. My mother, before she died, she tried to prepare me, told me to be dutiful, to endure, that it would hurt at first, but that was normal, that men had needs and wives had obligations. Sarah's voice grew bitter. She never said it could be different. Maybe she didn't know. Your mother lived in a cage, Joseph said quietly. She taught you to survive in that cage. She could not teach what she did not know. Sarah finally looked at him. What do Lakota women know? He considered carefully. They know their worth is not in what they can endure, but in who they are. They know their bodies are their own, gifted by the Great Spirit. They know that joining with a man should bring joy, not pain. Joy, Sarah repeated, the word foreign on her tongue in this context. My mother told me once. Joseph continued, that she pitied white women, said they were taught to fear what should be beautiful. Among our people, women have power. They choose their husbands. They can divorce simply by placing his belongings outside the teepee, in the marriage bed. Their pleasure matters as much as the man's. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't look away. I've never heard anyone speak of women's pleasure, because your people make sacred things shameful. They take what should be sharing and make it taking. His voice held an edge of anger. This is why I promised you would never be hurt. I have seen what your world does to women. It is wrong. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. Sarah watched them rise and disappear into the darkness. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. When you help me down from your horse, or when you steady me crossing a stream, I feel things. But then fear comes, because I was taught that feeling leads to pain. Joseph leaned forward slightly. Fear is the enemy of joy. It makes the body rigid when it should be soft, closed when it should be open. This is why Lakota mothers teach their daughters differently. They teach that desire is natural, like hunger or thirst. That satisfaction is their right. But how can they be sure? How can they trust? Because Lakota men are taught too. From boyhood, we learn that our strength is for protecting, not conquering. That a woman's trust is a gift to be earned, not a prize to be taken. A man who hurts a woman in the marriage bed brings shame to himself and his family. Sarah absorbed this, trying to reconcile it with everything she'd been taught. Thomas, the blacksmith, he used to say that women who enjoyed that were wicked, broken. Then he was a fool, Joseph said flatly, and a coward. Only weak men need women to be broken. They fell silent again. Sarah felt as if she stood at the edge of a precipice, looking down at beliefs that had shaped her entire life. To question them felt dangerous, revolutionary. I dream sometimes, she confessed. Not nightmares about my father or Thomas. Different dreams, about possibilities, but I wake ashamed. Shame is a chain your people wrapped around you. You can choose to remove it. How? Joseph stood and moved around the fire to sit beside her, careful to maintain respectful distance. By learning your own heart, by understanding that what you feel is natural, not wicked, by knowing you have the right to choose, always choose, what happens to your body. Sarah turned to look at him, studying his face in the firelight. Even if I chose to never, to always keep distance, even then, especially then, his eyes were steady, sincere. I told you I would die before hurting you. This includes hurting your spirit by pushing past your boundaries. But you're a man. Don't you have needs? The word tasted bitter, carrying all the weight of her father's teachings. I have feelings, Joseph corrected. Desires. Yes, when you smile while learning a new skill, when you laugh with Morning Star, when you stand brave against your father. I feel many things, but these are my feelings to manage, not your burden to carry. Sarah felt tears threaten. No man had ever suggested his desires were his own responsibility. In my old life, she said slowly, I was taught to make myself small, quiet, accepting, to never want, only to be wanted, to never choose, only be chosen. But here, she gestured at the camp around them. Here I learned to track deer and tan hides. I have a name I earned. I speak my thoughts without punishment. You are becoming who you always were. Joseph said, not changing, uncovering. And if what I uncover surprises me, frightens me, then you face it with courage, as you have faced everything else. He paused, then added quietly, and you are not alone in facing it. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like ice beginning to crack under spring sun. When you carried me across that swollen creek, I felt safe, not just from drowning, safe from everything. I'd never felt that before with a man. This is as it should be. A man's arms should be sanctuary, not threat. Your wife, Winter Dove, she knew this? This safety? A sad smile touched his lips. Yes, she was fierce in her own right, afraid of nothing. But in my arms, she could be soft. She said it was like being held by the mountain, strong, steady, unchanging. You must miss her terribly. I do. But grief is not a cage either. It is a season that passes. He looked at her directly. She would have liked you, would have said you have the heart of a warrior struggling to break free. The fire had burned low again. Around them, the camp slept peacefully, secure in their hidden valley. Tomorrow would bring more flight, more uncertainty. But tonight, in this moment, Sarah felt something she'd never experienced, the possibility of healing. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, of myself, of discovering I'm not who I was taught to be. This is wisdom, not weakness. Change requires courage. Joseph stood, preparing to return to his guard post. But know this, Wiaka win, whatever you discover about yourself, you remain under my protection. Whatever you choose or do not choose, you are valued here. As he walked away, Sarah called softly. Joseph? He turned. Thank you for seeing me as more than something to be owned or fixed or saved. You were never broken, he replied. Only caged, and cages, no matter how strong, cannot hold an eagle forever. Alone again by the dying fire. Sarah sat with her thoughts. The conversation had opened doors she'd kept locked for so long. Behind them lay possibilities she'd never dared imagine. That her body could be her own. That desire wasn't sin. That she had the right to want and choose and feel. It terrified her. It exhilarated her. In the distance, a wolf howled, answered by another. Even predators, she realized, sang to their mates with tenderness. The natural world knew nothing of shame, only connection. She thought of Joseph's steady eyes, his careful distance, his promises that asked nothing in return. Thought of how different it felt to be protected rather than possessed. For the first time, she began to understand that when he'd whispered, "I'll die before I hurt you," he hadn't just meant physical pain. He meant he would never cage her spirit again. As the stars wheeled overhead and the fire died to glowing coals, Sarah Whitman, Wiaka Win, felt the first stirrings of what freedom might truly mean. Not just escape from her father's house or Thomas's fists, but liberation from the chains wrapped around her mind and heart. Tomorrow she would run again, flee the soldiers who sought to drag her back to that old life. But tonight, she had taken the first steps on a different journey, toward healing, toward trust, toward the possibility that joy might exist where she had only known fear. The owl called again, and this time, it sounded like a blessing. The storm struck without warning, as prairie storms often did. One moment the sky was clear, the next, black clouds rolled in like an avalanche, bringing sheets of rain and violent wind. The band had been traveling through a narrow canyon when the deluge hit, turning the dry creek bed into a raging torrent. "To high ground," Chief Stonehand commanded, but the chaos of wind and water swallowed his words. Sarah clung to her horse as it struggled against the rising water. Through the driving rain, she could see families scattered, children crying, everyone fighting toward the canyon walls. Then she heard it, a rumbling that wasn't thunder. "Flash flood!" Joseph's voice cut through the storm. He was suddenly beside her, reaching for her horse's reins. "The canyon will fill! We must—" His words were cut off by shouting from behind. Through the rain, Sarah could see them, mounted soldiers, appearing like specters at the canyon's mouth. They had tracked the band after all, choosing the storm as cover for their ambush. There, the white woman! She recognized Thomas Brennan's voice, carrying over the storm. Everything happened at once. The floodwaters surged higher. Gunshots cracked through the air. Joseph's horse screamed and went down, throwing him into the churning water. Without thinking, Sarah slid from her own mount and plunged after him. The current was brutal, slamming her against rocks, filling her mouth with muddy water. But she had learned to swim in the creek near her childhood home, one of the few freedoms she'd stolen for herself. She fought the current, searching desperately until she saw him struggling to stay afloat, his left arm hanging uselessly. "Joseph!" She managed to grab his good arm, using the current to push them toward a cluster of boulders. They hauled themselves up, gasping, as chaos reigned around them. The soldiers had dismounted, taking cover behind rocks, exchanging fire with the Lakota warriors who had managed to find high ground. But the storm was the greater enemy. Sarah watched in horror as a wall of water crashed through the canyon, sweeping away horses, supplies, everything in its path. "Your arm," she said, seeing blood seeping through Joseph's shirt. "Bullet grazed it. I've had worse." He was scanning the canyon walls. "There, a deer trail. Can you climb?" Sarah nodded, though the path he indicated looked impossibly steep. They began to climb, helping each other over the slick rocks. Below, the battle continued sporadically, but the flood was forcing both sides to seek survival over conflict. They had climbed perhaps 50 feet when Thomas Brennan appeared above them, having found another route. His face was twisted with rage and something else, a possessive fury that made Sarah's blood cold. "Gotcha now, girl," he snarled, raising his rifle. Joseph moved to shield Sarah, but his wounded arm made him slow. The gun's barrel swung toward them. Sarah didn't think. Her hand found a rock and she threw it with all the accuracy Joseph had taught her while hunting. It struck Thomas squarely in the temple. He staggered, his shot going wild, and then his foot slipped on the wet stone. For a moment he teetered on the edge, arms windmilling. Then he fell backward with a scream, disappearing into the roiling waters below. Sarah stared at the spot where he'd vanished, shocked by her own actions. Joseph's good hand found her shoulder. "You saved us," he said simply. "Come, we must keep climbing." They reached a shallow cave halfway up the canyon wall just as exhaustion overtook them. Outside, the storm raged on, but the cave was dry, protected. Joseph sank down against the wall, his face gray with pain and blood loss. "Let me see," Sarah demanded, tearing strips from her dress to bind his wound. The bullet had torn through the muscle of his upper arm, but hadn't hit bone or major vessels. She worked with steady hands, using skills Morningstar had taught her. "You're trembling," Joseph observed as she tied off the bandage. "I killed him," Sarah whispered. "Thomas, I killed a man." "You protected us. There is no shame in this. I thought I would feel guilty, but I don't. Does that make me wicked?" Joseph caught her hand with his good one. "It makes you alive. He would have killed us both, then dragged you back to a life of pain. You chose life over death, freedom over captivity. The Great Spirit does not punish those who defend themselves." Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, but they could still hear occasional gunshots, shouts, the roar of floodwaters. They were cut off from the others, trapped until the waters receded. "Your people," Sarah said. "We have to help them. We can do nothing until the flood passes. They are strong, smart. Most will have reached safety." But worry creased his brow. They huddled together as night fell, sharing body heat against the cold that followed the storm. Sarah had never been this close to a man without fear, but Joseph's presence brought only comfort. She could feel his breathing, slightly labored from pain and exertion. "I'm sorry," she said into the darkness. "For what?" "For bringing this trouble. If they hadn't been chasing me—" "Stop." His voice was firm despite his exhaustion. "You did not make them cruel. You did not make them chase. You only chose to live free. The consequences are theirs, not yours." They fell quiet, listening to the storm's dying gasps. Then Joseph spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "When I pulled Winter Dove from our teepee after the soldiers' attack, she was already gone. I held her as her spirit left, powerless to save her." His good arm tightened slightly around Sarah. "Today, you pulled me from the water. You fought for my life. This helps heal something I thought would never mend." Sarah turned to look at him in the dim light. "You've saved me countless times, and now we save each other. This is partnership. This is what the whites don't understand. Strength shared is strength doubled." Despite everything, the storm, the battle, the uncertain fate of their people, Sarah felt a profound peace settle over her. She had fought for something precious and won, not through endurance or submission, but through action and choice. "Joseph," she said quietly, "what happens when the water goes down? There will be other soldiers, other Thomas Brennans. Then we face them, together." He paused, then added, "Unless you wish to leave, you could go east, where no one knows you. Start fresh." The suggestion hit Sarah like cold water. "Leave? After everything? Is that what you want, for me to go?" "No." The word came quick, forceful, then softer. "No, but I would not cage you with my wanting. You must choose freely." Sarah thought of the life she'd fled, the cage of her father's house, the prison of Thomas's expectations. Then she thought of the life she'd found, Morning Star's laughter, the pride in Chief Stonehand's eyes when he named her Wayaka Win, the careful patience with which Joseph taught her to survive. Most of all, she thought of this moment, huddled in a cave with a wounded warrior who even now put her freedom above his desires. "I choose to stay," she said firmly. "This is my family now. You are my—" She paused, searching for words. "You are mine to protect, as I am yours to protect. If that brings trouble, we face it as one." In the darkness, she felt rather than saw Joseph smile. "Wayaka Win, my fierce eagle woman." They stayed awake through the night, keeping watch, tending Joseph's wound, sharing stories to hold back fear for their people. When dawn finally came, painting the canyon in shades of gold and revealing the flood's devastation, they were ready to face whatever waited below. The waters had receded, leaving debris and sorrow in their wake. But as they carefully descended, they saw signs of hope, tracks leading up the canyon walls, evidence that most of the band had escaped. The soldiers, it seemed, had fled when the flood became the greater threat. They found the others gathered on the plateau above the canyon, counting losses, tending wounded. Morning Star ran to them, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We thought you were lost." When Joseph's horse went down, "Your new sister is part fish," Joseph said with a weak smile, "and part warrior. She saved my life twice in one day." As the story spread through the camp, how Sarah had pulled Joseph from the flood, how she had struck down the white man who would have killed them both, the way people looked at her changed. She was no longer the rescued white woman learning their ways. She was Wayaka Win, who had proven her place among them with courage and blood. That night, as the band made camp in a safer place and mourned their losses, Sarah sat with Joseph as the medicine man properly tended his wound. She held his hand as they cleaned and stitched, offering the same steady presence he had always given her. "No cage, she whispered when the pain made him grimace. Not for either of us. Just chosen bonds, freely given. He squeezed her hand in answer. And in that simple touch was a promise of all the tomorrows they would face together. Dangerous, uncertain, but theirs to shape with their own choices. The storm had passed, leaving destruction but also clarity in its wake. They had been tested by water and blood, by nature and man's cruelty. They had emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. More importantly, they had emerged together. The autumn moon hung full and bright over the valley where the band had made their semi-permanent camp. 3 moons had passed since the flood and battle in the canyon. Joseph's arm had healed clean, leaving only a scar to mark where Sarah's quick action had saved them both. The threat of soldiers had faded as winter approached. Few cavalry units would risk the harsh plains weather to chase a single white woman who clearly didn't want rescuing. Sarah sat outside the tipi she still shared with Morningstar, working on a pair of winter moccasins. Her hands moved surely now, the beadwork growing beneath her fingers in patterns that told stories. Water and storm, flight and sanctuary, bonds chosen rather than imposed. "You've become quite skilled," Morningstar observed, settling beside her. "Those are fine enough for a wedding gift." Sarah's hands stilled. "I'm making them for Joseph. His winter pair wore through." "Of course you are." Morningstar's tone held gentle teasing. "Just as he happened to need new arrow fletching last week and a new knife sheath the week before." He touched Sarah's cheeks. "Friends help each other." "Friends?" Morningstar laughed. "Is that what you call it when he watches you like the sunrise? When you forget words mid-sentence if he walks by?" Sarah focused intently on her beadwork. Over the passing moons, something had indeed shifted between her and Joseph. The careful distance he'd always maintained had gradually dissolved, replaced by countless small intimacies. A hand on her elbow to steady her, sitting close during evening stories, the way his eyes found hers across the camp, holding meanings she was only beginning to decipher. "Your brother says, among your people, divorce is simple." Morningstar continued more seriously. "But what of the opposite? How does a woman show a man she chooses him?" Sarah looked up, finding Morningstar's eyes full of understanding. "You know, I've never, that I fear, I know you were taught that joining with a man means pain and submission, but I've also seen how you look at my brother. Not with fear anymore." It was true, somewhere between learning to track deer and fighting floods, between shared silences and steady protection, fear had transformed into something else entirely. When Joseph smiled, really smiled, not just the slight softening of his usual serious expression, Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. When he guided her hands to show her a new skill, she found herself wishing the lesson would last longer. "Among our people," Morningstar said gently, "a woman might show interest by preparing special foods for a man, by decorating his belongings, by seeking his company for walks." She paused meaningfully. "By making him winter moccasins with patterns that speak of partnership." Sarah studied the beadwork under her hands, unconsciously. She had been creating interlocking designs, paths that wove together, separated, but always returned to unity. That evening, as the camp settled into nighttime routines, Sarah found herself walking toward the grove where Joseph often went to think. He stood with his back to her, watching the stars emerge, but turned at her approach. "Wiyaka Win, you should be by the fires. The night grows cold." "I'm not cold," she said, though Autumn's bite was sharp. "I wanted to, that is, I finished these." She held out the moccasins, moonlight catching the careful beadwork. Joseph took them slowly, examining the patterns with growing understanding. "These are very fine," he said carefully. "The design speaks of choice," Sarah interrupted, her courage suddenly fierce. "Of paths that join by will, not force. Of partnership born from respect, not ownership." Joseph set the moccasins aside with great care, then stepped closer. Even now, he stopped just beyond arm's reach, letting her set the distance. "Sarah," he said, using her white name as he did in moments of deep emotion. You know my heart. Have known it for moons now, but I made promises. To never hurt me, to die before causing me pain. Sarah stepped forward, closing some of the distance between them. You've kept those promises. But Joseph, I'm not that terrified woman you found on the prairie anymore. I've learned to fight floods and soldiers. I've taken a life to save yours. I've found my strength. Another step. Now I want to learn what lies beyond fear. Be certain, he said, voice rougher than usual. I have waited. I can wait longer. I don't want to wait. The words came out in a rush. When you were wounded, when I thought I might lose you, I realized I've been letting my past steal my future. Thomas is dead. My father thinks me dead. But I'm alive. Joseph, for the first time in my life, truly alive. And I choose— She didn't finish because Joseph closed the remaining distance, his hand coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. What do you choose? Wiaka win. You, she whispered. I choose you. Not because I need protection anymore, but because I want partnership. Not because you saved me, but because you let me save myself. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and Sarah leaned into the touch that would have terrified her months ago. Among my people, Joseph said softly, a man must court properly, bring gifts to the woman's family, prove his worth. You've been courting me since the day we met. Sarah replied, every lesson, every patient moment, every time you saw me as a person instead of property. I need no horses or blankets to know your worth. Your ways are still new, your healing still fresh. I would not rush. Sarah silenced him by reaching up to touch his face in return, mirroring his gentle hold. Then don't rush, but don't hold back either. Show me what it means to be wanted without being consumed. Teach me this like you've taught me everything else. In the moonlight, she saw his control finally crack, not into hunger or demand, but into something far more powerful, tenderness mixed with desire, protection married to passion. He lowered his forehead to rest against hers. I have loved you since you threw that rock at Thomas Brennan, he admitted, fierce eagle woman who fights for what she claims. And I have loved you since you wrapped my feet by the stream, gentle warrior who gives without taking. Sarah's voice was barely a breath. But I didn't know love could exist without fear until you showed me. They stood that way for a long moment, sharing breath, hearts beating in rhythm. Then Joseph pulled back slightly, his eyes serious. If we do this, if we join our paths, it must be in the open, with honor. You deserve a proper wedding, witnesses to our choice. Sarah smiled. Morning Star has been dropping hints about wedding preparations for weeks. My sister sees much. A rare smile touched his lips. Will you make me court you properly, at least for a few days? Will there be more midnight walks, more excuses to sit close during stories? Many, he promised. And I will wear your moccasins so all can see your claim on me. Good, Sarah said firmly, because I find I'm quite possessive of what I choose freely. He laughed then, a sound she'd rarely heard, rich and full of joy. As am I, but possessive like the eagle with the sky, not seeking to cage, but to soar together. They walked back to camp hand in hand, a simple touch that spoke volumes. Warriors nodded approval. Women smiled knowingly. Morning Star actually clapped her hands in delight. That night, Sarah lay in her buffalo robes, not yearning for something out of reach, but anticipating something approaching. Outside, she could hear Joseph's voice among the men, probably enduring good-natured teasing about the moccasins he wore. She thought of the girl she'd been, terrorized by the very idea of a man's touch, convinced that intimacy meant pain, that love was just another word for ownership. That girl still lived inside her, would always be part of her story. But she no longer ruled Sarah's choices. Tomorrow, Joseph would probably bring her father a horse. Chief Stonehand had taken that role, having no use for the horses but understanding the ceremony's importance. There would be feasting, celebrating the joining of two paths that had already grown so intertwined it was hard to see where one ended and the other began. But tonight, Sarah simply held the knowledge close to her heart. She had chosen love over fear, trust over terror, and somewhere in the camp, a Lakota warrior wore moccasins that declared to all who could read the signs, "This woman claims this man. This man treasures this woman. These two choose each other freely." The full moon blessed the valley with silver light, and Sarah Whitman, Wiaka Win, finally understood what her mother had never known, that love without choice was just another cage, but love freely given and received was the greatest freedom of all. Dawn broke golden across the prairie, painting the grassland in shades of amber and rose. Sarah stood at the edge of camp, wrapped in the wedding blanket Joseph's grandmother had woven decades ago. The ceremony had been simple yet profound, Chief Stonehand speaking words of binding while they stood before the sacred fire, the whole band witnessing their choice to walk as one. Now, as the camp stirred to life on this first morning of their married life, Sarah watched the sun rise with new eyes. Joseph emerged from their teepee, their own dwelling now, raised by the community as a wedding gift. He moved to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her, enfolding her in warmth and safety. "No regrets?" he asked quietly, his breath warm against her ear. Sarah leaned back into him, marveling at how natural it felt, only that it took so long to get here. The night had been a revelation, true to every promise. Joseph had been endlessly patient, endlessly gentle. Where she had expected pain, she found tenderness. Where she had feared demand, she discovered giving. He had read her body like he read trail signs, attentive to every response, ensuring her comfort before seeking his own satisfaction. For the first time, Sarah understood what her mother had never known, that intimacy could be a conversation, not a conquest. The scouts report buffalo moving south. Joseph said, "The band will follow. It means leaving this valley." "Then we go." Sarah replied simply, "Home isn't a place anymore. It's wherever we stand together." He turned her in his arms, studying her face in the morning light. "You've changed so much from the frightened woman I found." "No," Sarah corrected. "I've become who I always was, beneath the fear. You didn't change me, Joseph. You gave me space to change myself." They were interrupted by Morningstar's cheerful call. "Stop watching the sunrise and come eat. Married life doesn't excuse you from daily work." Laughing, they joined the others for the morning meal. Sarah moved through the familiar routines with new belonging. She wasn't a guest anymore, or even adopted family. She was wife to a respected warrior, with her own place in the intricate web of relationships that bound the band together. As the camp prepared for travel, Sarah worked alongside the other women, dismantling teepees with practiced efficiency. She caught some of the older women watching her with approval, this white woman who had learned their ways, who had proven herself in flood and battle, who made their Joseph smile again after his long grief. "You're truly one of us now," Blue Shell woman said as they worked, not by blood, but by choice. "The strongest bonds are those we choose." The truth of those words resonated deeply. Sarah thought of her father, her blood kin who had tried to sell her like cattle. Then she looked at these women, Lakota by birth, who had taught her, protected her, celebrated her victories. Family, she realized, was more than shared ancestry. It was shared values, mutual respect, chosen loyalty. By midday, the band was moving, following the ancient paths their people had traveled for generations. Sarah rode beside Joseph, comfortable now on her own pony, a wedding gift from the band. As they crested a hill, the vista before them took her breath away. Endless grassland rippling like a golden ocean, dotted with wildflowers, beneath a sky so vast it seemed to hold eternity. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "This is what they would take from us," Joseph said, his voice carrying an edge of sadness. "The whites push ever westward, claiming land that cannot be owned, fencing what should run free." Sarah heard the unspoken worry. Their idyllic life, this freedom she'd found, existed in a shrinking bubble. Every year brought more settlers, more soldiers, more pressure on the traditional ways. Whatever comes, she said firmly. We face it together. He reached over to take her hand. Together, yes. They made camp that evening by a clear stream, the kind of spot Joseph had taught her to recognize. Water, shelter, good sightlines for defense. As Sarah helped raise their teepee, she marveled at how natural it all felt now. Her hands knew the work. Her body had strengthened. Her mind had expanded to hold new languages, new skills, new ways of seeing. After the evening meal, as stars began to pierce the darkening sky, an elder named Singing Crow called for stories. One by one, people shared tales of hunts and heroes, of wisdom learned and lessons taught. Then Singing Crow turned to Sarah. "Weaka win," he said formally. "You have a story now. Will you share it?" Sarah felt all eyes turn to her. Once, such attention would have made her shrink, try to disappear. Now she sat straighter, finding her voice. "I'll tell of a woman who lived in a cage," she began, "who was taught that walls meant safety and chains meant love. This woman believed the lies until the cage became too small, the chains too heavy, so she ran." She told it all. The fear, the flight, the warrior who showed her that strength could be gentle. She spoke of learning to track and hunt, to scrape hides and bead moccasins, of facing her father's claim and choosing her own path, of flood and battle, of saving and being saved. This woman learned that freedom isn't just absence of chains, Sarah concluded. It's the presence of choice. Every day, she chooses to stay, to learn, to love, to fight for this life she's built. And every day, the choice makes her stronger. Silence greeted the end of her tale, then nods of approval, murmurs of agreement. She had told it well, in the way of their oral traditions, making the personal universal. Later, in the privacy of their teepee, Joseph held her close. "You told our story beautifully," he said. "Our story isn't finished," Sarah replied. "It's just beginning." Then we write it together, day by day. They made love slowly, still learning each other's rhythms, still marveling at the trust that allowed such vulnerability. Sarah, who had once believed a woman's lot was to endure, discovered she could ask for what she wanted, could guide and be guided, could find joy in giving pleasure as much as receiving it. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the night sounds of the camp, dogs settling, babies fussing, the soft voices of those on watch, safe sounds, home sounds. "I used to dream of escape," Sarah murmured against his chest. "Now I dream of staying, of children who will run free across this grassland, of growing old beside you, becoming one of those wise women who teach young ones to bead. These are good dreams." Joseph said, "Worth fighting for when the hard times come." "Will they come? The hard times?" "Yes," he answered honestly. "The white world presses closer each year, but we've survived hard times before. We'll survive them again." Sarah thought of the journey that had brought her here, from a terrified woman fleeing an arranged marriage to a wife lying content in her husband's arms. Every step had required courage, from that first desperate flight to the daily choice to try, to learn, to trust. "Then we face them as we've faced everything," she said, "together. No cages for either of us, just chosen bonds." Joseph's arms tightened around her. "I'll die before I let anyone cage you again, and I'll fight beside you to keep us both free," Sarah promised in return. Outside their teepee, the prairie wind sang its eternal song. Stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed her desperate flight, now watching over her chosen home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, the constant movement of nomadic life, the endless work of survival, the looming threats from an expanding nation that didn't understand or respect the indigenous way of life. But tonight, Sarah Whitman, Weaka Win, Feather Woman, wife of Joseph Running Elk, rested in the certainty of love freely given and received. She had learned to track and hunt, to work hides and speak Lakota. More importantly, she had learned to trust, to choose, to fly free. The girl who had fled Redemption Creek would barely recognize the woman she'd become. That girl had known only fear, had accepted that marriage meant ownership, that a woman's voice should stay silent, her desires unspoken. This woman spoke her mind in council, rode her pony with skill across difficult terrain, could track a deer or defend a loved one with equal fierce competence. This woman knew that true strength lay not in dominance, but in partnership. That love was not a cage, but wings, as sleep claimed her. Sarah smiled. Tomorrow, she and Joseph would ride toward the horizon together, following the buffalo, fleeing nothing, chasing only the promise of another day lived free. Whatever the future held, soldiers or settlers, hardship or plenty, they would meet it as equals, as partners, as two people who had chosen each other and continued to make that choice with every sunrise. The prairie wind whispered through the teepee walls, carrying dreams of buffalo and freedom, of children yet to be born who would know both worlds, of love that transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. And somewhere in that wind, Sarah could swear she heard the cry of an eagle, wild and free, soaring on currents no cage could ever contain. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let us know what you thought of Sarah and Joseph's journey. Your thoughts and feedback mean the world to us.